Okay, looks like it's working. And so hello everybody. I'm Vicki from Songbird Yarn and Fibres, and my store is in Stratford, Ontario. I just have a little tiny front store where I sell my yarn, and then I do all my dyeing at the back. So I'll just give you a quick little here. I'm just going to turn my screen around if I can. Hang on here. I don't know where I do that. Let me see. It's different on Zoom. It's different. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is my little front of store. So I've got a little bit. I don't keep a lot of bulky or sparkle in stock. I usually just dye it to order. But I just have a little tiny storefront. So there's my sock yarn. I usually have a pretty good supply of sock yarn. And again, I don't keep worsted too much in stock. I sort of dye it to order with hat kits. And then my little lovebirds, which are fun. So they are male and female plumage of a bird. So these ones are painted buntings. And I have wood duck, which looks like this one. It's knit. So this is the male wood duck and the female wood duck. And cardinal, which looks like this. So you got male cardinal, female cardinal. And I also have indigo bunting, which that's the female and that's the male and the female indigo bunting. So you get a 50-gram skein of each plumage, male and female. And you can knit odd socks. People stripe them sometimes. Anyways, they're just sort of fun. So I have those. I sell woolly worm head hat kits too. So they include a pattern code to make a hat like that. But anyways, I am now going to bring you over to do some dyeing with me. We're going to dye some owls. So my newest colorways are 3 different owls that I do sort of as a fade. And I'm going to show you how I do them. So this is here is some snowy owl drawing. So you can see it's mostly white. It's got some black spots on it, and it's got little bits of yellow because snowy owls have yellow eyes. But it's mostly, it's a fairly white colorway. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a batch of snowy owl. We're going to make a batch of barn owl, which is this one. And we're going to make a batch of great horned owl, which is this one. And they all go together. I don't have a sample of snowy owl dry, but they all go together to work as a fade if you want them to. So this is the darkest one, this is medium, and then the snowy owl is lightest. But they all have these black spots in them. So I'm going to take you through the process of what I do. And to do that, I'm going to have to stick you in my tripod, and hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to turn it around and try and get this set up so that I can see what you're seeing and you can watch below. So I'm hoping that you can see. Let's see here. Let's lower this down. Okay, so I'm going to be working right here quickly. So I'm going to start off by showing you what I'm going to be doing to get the black dots. So I have yarn that I've soaked first in water. And so it's nice and wet. It's been soaking for a good, it's superwash yarn. So I like to make sure it's soaking for at least, just back so you can see it even better. I like to make sure it's soaked for at least an hour. If I can, I will often leave it overnight, and I will often soak it overnight and then just start working with it in the morning. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some dye that I've mixed with citric acid already, and I'm going to paint spots. So I have dye that I've pre-mixed, and I use a bit of a thickener to make it even a little bit thicker than just regular dye with water. And I paintbrush, and I literally just daub on big black spots like this. And I go over the whole skein. This is all showing up. Yeah, you can see it. Good. So I just go over the whole skein on the one side first. And I'm random. I don't count them. I just sort of do them so that there's lots of spots on them. So spots. And then when I think it's sort of got good coverage, I make sure they're nice and dark. Then I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to flip it over and rearrange it so that I'm working on sort of the other side that hasn't got any dots yet. Make sure it's all sort of spread out. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to dot this side. And when I feel like it's got enough, it usually needs a few more. So I just sort of do that. And then I'm just going to pick this up and let it sort of reorganize and then put it back down again. And then I'm going to look for any spots that look particularly light. And this looks pretty good. Maybe a couple of here and there. I want to make sure that you're getting, as you knit, you're getting blacks, little like, you know, if you think about it, what you're getting is maybe 1 or 2 stitches at a time that's going to have black on it. That's going to give you a black stitch. So you're going to get sort of bigger than a speckle, but smaller than a variegated repeat of black as you're knitting through it. So once I've got that done, then I'm going to pop it into a pan like this. And this is a steamer pan, so it's got a little bit of water underneath it. And the pan just sits on top. And I'm going to lay it down like this and put a lid on it and turn it on and steam it. And I give that about 20 minutes of steaming. I'm not going to make you wait 20 minutes. I've prepared myself, but I do about 20 to 30 minutes of steaming. Often I will flip it over halfway through just to make sure that the heat's, with only 3 skeins in there, it'll be fine in 20 minutes. Sometimes I'm doing 6 or 8 or 10 skeins at a time. So I'll flip it over and make sure that the steam gets to everything. And then I usually just test it either with white paper towel or something just to make sure that the black is set and it's not going to run. But the heat sets it pretty well. There's citric acid mixed in with my dye when I start it. So it sets up pretty quickly. And I'm going to move this over here. I'll steam that later. But in the meantime, I'm going to show you how I dye the 3 owls. So I'm going to pop this up and I'm going to make you higher so you can hopefully see all 3. Can you see all 3 pans pretty well now? 1, 2, 3. I think they're all showing up on the screen pretty easily. You're just not going to see right above them because I'm not set up to have anything being totally above, but I think you'll get the gist of it. So because I'm dyeing something that I want to fade, I sort of decided that I had to have some colors that are indicative of the owls, but also will work together. So that's part of the reason I picked the 3 owls I did, because the great horned owl is much darker. The barn owl is a sort of a very pale, tannish color with a lot of white. And then the snowy owl is primarily white with the black spots and then those bright yellow eyes. So I'm using the yellow base to sort of tie the 3 of them together with the black spots, but then I'm changing the colors of the dye I'm using throughout them. So I've got 3 pans of water set up here and there's citric acid in all 3 of them. So when I put the yarn in, there's going to be citric acid in there to affect the dyeing with the heat. So it'll all, the dye will adhere. And let me just see here. I think I can probably lower you a bit so you're a little bit closer to the pans and get a little bit less of my background. There, I think that's pretty good. Sorry if I'm making people dizzy. All right, so I took the liberty of pre-dyeing and steaming all these. So these are already ready to go in the pan. They've already got the black spots on them. And I'm just putting them in the water. No heat yet, just putting them in. And I'm just going to let them sit there for a minute. I get all 3 of them loaded in. So I usually do 3 in a pan at a time. That sort of fits well. I find that if I do more than 3, I don't get even color distribution of the dye. That it just, I get one that's much darker than 2 of the others because they've sort of been covered over. And then this one's the last snowy owl. So it's going to go in here. Okay, so I have my 3 pans ready to go. And I've pre-mixed dyes. So I've got my darkest brown here. So that's going to be used only in my great horned owl. I've got a medium brown here. I'm going to use a little bit in the great horned owl, and I'm going to use a little bit in the barn owl, but not a lot in the barn owl. But it's going to have enough that it's going to tie it over. And then I've got my lightest brown here, which is going to be none in the great horned owl, primarily the color of my barn owl, and nothing in the snowy owl because it's white. So I don't use any colors other than the black and gold. So all I do now is I'm going to turn the burners on. So I like to use induction burners because I don't have room for a stove in here. So it works out great. And they also have timers on them, which is wonderful. So I can set them up to turn off after a certain amount of time. And they heat up quickly and they work well. So I'm going to get them all set up on low heat. Okay, so I'm going to now start with the great horned owl. So I take my darkest brown and I'm going to use about half of this on the front, and then afterwards I'll flip it and I'll use the other half of it. So what I'm trying for is I want to have dark spots, but I want to leave a little bit of light spots too. So I'm going to put some, sort of move it around. And there I've used about half. I'm going to save that for after. And I'm also going to use my medium brown, but I don't want to cover all the white. I want to leave some white, but I want it to sort of mix. That's probably good. So it's sort of just a mixture, and I'm going to let that heat up. And the dye, I'm not going to stir it around or anything. So I will get certain colors of dye sticking to different spots, and I'll end up with sort of a mottled effect. That mixed with the black spots and also the speckles that I'm going to put on right at the end here. Once it's nice and hot, I'll put these on. I'll show you that. But I don't want to disturb the yarn. So the bottom side, when I flip it over, you'll see will be quite light when I flip it, and then we'll put a little bit more dye on the other side. But that's going to afford me a bit of white as well. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to the second one, the barn owl. The barn owl is a little bit of the medium brown and a lot more of the light brown. So I'm just going to put a little bit of the medium brown in here. Just a bit. And mostly this lighter brown. And it's like almost like a tan. It's quite light. Oh, I'll hold the camera over in a minute and you can take a look right in. But same thing, I want to leave some white, and I don't want to have too much dark because I want them to be a real difference between this one and this one. So this is gonna darken up. This medium brown will darken up as I go, and so will the really pale brown. It'll darken up a little bit too. And then the last one, I'm just going to leave for now. That's the snowy owl down here, and I will. When it's hot, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes from now, I will be able to add some of my dye speckles. But until then, I will just let them heat up. So I will, let me see if I can turn this around here again. Okay, I'm going to turn it around again. So I'll turn my light off. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask while we're waiting? It's going to be about 5 minutes while this is cooking. So you can unmute and ask me a question. Doesn't sound like anybody does. That's fine. What I'll do, so I did set up a code as well, which I'll talk about right now, but I'll also talk about later on in the hour in the program. So I set up a code, Love Affair, all one word, no space, and all lowercase. So Love Affair. And that will, if you use that this weekend between now and midnight on Sunday, you'll get 10% off anything you order in the store, in my store. And that's Songbird Fibres, all one word, .ca. I will turn this around again. Okay, so we can see the cooking going on. So we've got this dark with lots of dark, but there's still little bits of white going on. And yeah, thank you for typing that in, Yuriko. So there's still lots of little bits of white going on. So now what I'm going to do is it's warming up. It's getting fairly warm. And so I'm going to add a little bit of, this is a goldish, it's called Aztec gold. So it's an orangey gold. It's not just yellow. It's got a little bit more punch than just a yellow. And I mix it. So it's dye powder. And I mix it with citric acid. So there's a lot of citric acid in there and not much dye powder. Like it's like about a 1/4 teaspoon of dye powder and a good 1.5 tablespoons or so of citric acid. So the citric acid is the vehicle, and it will sit on the hot yarn and take right away so that it doesn't disperse and just make yellow areas. I want it to be, I don't care if I have like really tight speckles, but I want them constrained to sort of spots on the yarn. I don't want to have the whole yarn looking like it's got a yellow wash over it. So as long as the water's hot, and it's pretty good and hot right now, I'm going to just take some of this and I'm just going to very lightly just sort of, yeah, you can see that. So I'm just going to tap it in there. And I should put a mask on. I normally would wear a respirator mask, but I don't deal with a lot of dye powder because I usually don't speckle much. These owls are speckled. So I'm just going to do that. So I've just sort of tried to lay it in. If you can see, I've tried to lay it in where there were a little bit whiter areas. So I've laid some in there. I've got a little bit over here, some down here. And it's just going to give it a nice little warmth. Maybe put a tiny bit more up here. Just try to make sure it's on all 3 skeins as I go. But I try not to put it in the water. If I put it in the water, that's when you're going to get it just sort of dispersing all over the place. So I'm looking for yarn that's sitting up above the water. Okay. I'll move you over. The next one. So this is the barn owl. And let me get you down here to see it. Okay, so here's my low tack. Okay, so same thing. I'm going to just sort of gently pop this in a few different spots that are sort of sitting up above the water that are sort of lighter as I go along. Just like I said, it just gives it a bit of a warmth. And you can see that it's not really, even though it's a gold, it's not really yellow. It's more of a bit of an orangey yellow. It's got nice warmth to it. So it works really well with the browns. So I've got a dark one. That's the great horned owl. And it's got lots of deeper browns in it. And still some light spots and the gold. And then I've got this one. Similar, but it's got more tan areas and lighter areas. And I tried to leave more white. There's a little bit less water in this pan as well, so that more yarn is sitting above the dye. And then the very last one I'm going to do is, for a second, I will hold on to this while I do it. So you can see, is the snowy owl. So same thing. And I'm just going to pop this in, sort of in a few different spots. I don't want to have too much yellow. I just want to have enough that it's got a little bit of interest in it. Because snowy owls are white primarily with black spots. The males have black spots, but they do have the bright yellow eyes, and the yellow is what ties the black spots and the yellow is what ties all three of them together. So they have that in common between them. So that helps make them fade together. So, all right, so I'm gonna let that cook for a minute. I'm gonna move us over to my table. And I think I have a sample. I do have a sample of these other ones that I'll show you. So here's a swatch of an owl being knit. So let me turn my light on again. Okay, so here's the bottom part is great horned owl. Now this is my very first rendition of it. I've gotten a little bit better at my barn owl now. It's a little bit brighter, but that's my snowy or my great horned owl. So it's nice and dark. You can see how the little black bits just go through. So you just get like 1 or 2 stitches at a time of the black. You don't get a ton of black. You just get little swatches of it. And then I switched in about here. And then this is the barn owl. And I've actually, like I said, I've gotten a little bit better at the barn owl to make it a little bit brighter. So it's not quite as dark as this. This is maybe a little bit too close. I'd like this. My goal is to get this a little bit brighter so that it doesn't have as much of the darker colors in it. But you can still see all the little dabs of black, which tie it together. And the gold is in there, but it's very faint. There's not a lot of it. You notice it a bit more on the snowy owl. And then so at the top, I've got the snowy owl. And again, this is an early one. I'm putting a little bit more gold in to tie it in a bit better. So it's not quite as stark a contrast. But you can see the little black spots. So it kind of has the same look as the snowy owl. And then you get it all nicely packaged with my bird tags. So there's the snowy owl. So you can see the picture of the snowy owl and what it looks like knit. So not bad. I mean, obviously it's never going to look exactly like the bird, but I do try to sort of stick to the colors of the bird. And then there's the barn owl. And then this is a nice lighter skein. You can see it's got a lot more white in it. And there's the barn owl. So you can see does have a bit of dark, but he's also got these nice soft tan spots, and he's got some gold coloring as well. And then the great horned owl is the darkest of them. So he's got lots of dark spots on him. He's got dark browns, and he's still got his yellow eyes. So we still got the yellow that picks up in it. So yeah. All right, I'm going to turn these yarns. So we'll see them turned over. Second. Sorry, I'm probably making people seasick moving back and forth. I apologize for that, but I'm sort of at a limit with my technology. This is about the best I can do. Okay, so turn the light back on. So we're going to look at the great horned owl first. We're going to flip it over. So my speckles have set, so they're not going to run when I turn them over. They're all set. And I'm going to pick up the yarn and I hold it, put it back down again. And you can see it's quite a bit different on the front. It's got quite a bit more white. So I'm just going to pop it in there. I don't want to mix too much. But I want to lay some more color in there. So I'm going to lay a little bit more dark. And I'm going to lay a little bit more of the medium. And a few more speckles. And again, I'm going to try to put the speckles on the stuff that's sticking up. It's not underwater. And it gets a little trickier because I've added liquid to it, so it's more underwater, but just like that. Bring it over here. So you can see the barn owl. And same thing. I'm just going to check the speckles. They're nice. It's nice and hot. You can see it's just barely bubbling, so it's not quite boiling, but it's nice and hot, which sets the colors. And as I flip this over, it's going to be quite a bit different on the other side. So I'm going to spread it out a bit so I get more of the white spots showing. And I just want a little bit of the darker color, because I don't want to go too dark accidentally. So I'm just going to put a little bit more in there. And then I'm going to use a lot more of the soft color, the lightest brown. It's quite light. So it's not adding a lot of color at all. And oops, I'm going to turn this up too. And then last but not least, the snowy owl. So I'm going to pick it up. You can see all the color on that side, but on this side, there's no speckles at all because the speckles don't run through, but there's lots of the black spots. So I'm just going to spread it all out again. Add a bit more yellow to the side so that when you're knitting, you're getting yellow, sporadically, not just every 7 or 8 rows. I want you to get it, a little bit of color as you go through. So that's it. And I'm just going to let these cook. I will set my timer. These are nice because they have timers on them. So I'm going to set them for 10 minutes. And then we can go over and talk. And these will just be cooking while I'm talking. So 10 minutes. And there. Okay. So I'm going to bring you back over. I'll show you the finished product when we're done, but it's got to take about 10 minutes to cook. So in the meantime, I'll plug you back in and I'll flip you around. Okay. Let's flip it around so we get the front again. There we go. And turn this on again. And there we go. So, yeah, so for those of you who don't know anything about me at all, my slogan is kind of what I use to sort of explain what I do. My slogan is where birds meet yarn. So my goal is to take different birds and use them to inspire colorways in yarn. So for instance, this one is a red-winged blackbird. And red-winged blackbirds are basically blackbirds, except that they have these nice yellow and red spots on their wings. So what I do is I try to come up with a yarn that's going to work to sort of be representative of what a red-winged blackbird looks like. So that's one example. Another example, this is already rolled into a ball, but you'll be able to see it. This is called blue-footed booby. So blue-footed boobies are these very cool birds from the Galapagos Islands. I have never seen one in real life, but I have lots of customers that have told me that they've seen them. So one day I might get to see them. But they have this beautiful teal colored feet. And then the rest of them are just sort of brown and white. So the yarn itself, the background colors, all brown and white dyed, very mottled texture when it comes out knitted. But they've got this, it's got this nice teal repeat, that goes through for about, maybe 10, 12 inches. And then you get back to the nice brown and white color in the background. So I have a few samples that I can show you too that are knit in different yarns if people are interested in that. Are there specific things anybody would like to see? Shaking heads, no. Okay, there's not a lot of people with their cameras on. So let me see what I can show you. Do I have a sample of gray peacock feather and show us what I've made with? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll walk you over to my samples and I'll show you some different samples. So, okay. So there's a technique called assigned pooling that I didn't create. It's Chasing Rabbits Fibre. I think it's Dawn Barker is now her company name. And what she does is she takes a variegated skein and you knit along with the variegated skein, no extra colors. But whenever you reach that dark or change in color, you stop and you do something different with it that uses it all up, so that when you start knitting again, you're knitting with the background color again. So this is made with Anna's Hummingbird, which I'll show you over here. So I'll hang this up again so you can see it. And this is what the skein looks like. So it's just got this one pink end in it that's about 8 or 10 inches long. And then the rest of it is all these nice browns and greens. So when you're knitting, as you go along with the planned pooling or the assigned pooling, when the pink starts, you stop doing just regular stockinette stitch and you make these little florals, and that uses up all the pink in the round of on the skein. And then you're back to the background colors and you knit again until you get to the pink starting again. And when you get to pink starting again, you do that to use it all up. And then you keep going. So you end up seeing background colors that's setting, the hot pink as the front. And that's exactly what the bird looks like. Got a bright pink head. And then the rest of them is very sort of nondescript greens and browns. So, and that I've got the same technique that works with, here's another one done the same way, but with the blue-footed booby colorway, which I was just talking about. So you can see it there. And that one I actually did a little bit, I went a little rogue on my own because I didn't want all the florals to pile up on top of each other. So sometimes I just did a row of reverse stockinette stitch when I came to the color instead of doing a flower. So I've got a little bit of texture through it as well. And then when I got to the border on this one, I didn't do any of the flowers. I just let the variegation run. So you can see where it's just variegated in the border rather than having the flowers. So just a little bit of a take on it. What else do I have? So colorways. Some of my really common popular colorways. Great Blue Heron's very, very popular. This shawl, there's a Stephen West shawl here made with Great Blue Heron. 2 years ago, I made the Slip Stravaganza. So it's here, knit with the Great Blue Heron on the top. I just saw somebody ask about puffin. So I don't know, I don't think I have any socks knit in puffin, but I do on my Instagram. If you go to my Instagram account, which is Songbird Fibres, is the name of the Instagram, like all one word, Songbird Fibres, it'll come up. And on my Instagram account, in my stories, I've got some highlights that I've saved. I think it's like 2022 knits, 2021 knits, socks. I've got some different highlights. There's lots of samples of puff in there. So if you have to scroll through a few different stories, but you'll be able to see samples of them. And there's samples of lots of other colorways in there too. Some people have knit sweaters that I've got in there. Lots of different socks. So I sort of have my yarn in my shop laid out in a certain way so that when you come in, I can sort of say, okay, this side, you're going to get really stripy projects because there's really distinct differences in the color. So like Cowbird's got this dark brown, and then it's got sort of lighter grays and blues. So you're going to get some good striping as you're knitting with it. Same with Kestrel, same with Northern Cardinal. Northern Cardinal's got a lot of contrast between the colors. But then there's colors like, somebody's got that over there. Then there's colors like Nicobar Pigeon, which is, it's got lots of color to it. You can see it in the light. It's got lots of color. It's got dark blues. It's got purples. It's got some greens. It's got some golds in it. Some golds come through as well. But it won't stripe because it's not really done in a pan where I'm dyeing a certain section of one color and then dyeing a second section another color. So what you'll get instead is for Nicobar Pigeon is you'll get something like this. So this is, so you can see it's not really offering you stripes as much as just lots of color. And you pick up, you know, you've got the golds and you've got some purples and blues. And, but it won't give you a repeat. It won't give you pooling. Whereas if you're knitting with something like Stellar's J, so Stellar's J is this one, and it's very specifically sort of half the skein is dyed in blue and half the skein is dyed in black, because the bird is sort of half blue and half black. So like I said, I try to let the bird inspire me for how I dye it. But because of that, when you're knitting in the round, you're going to get very specific. You've got the blacks and the blues, and then you've got sort of the transition colors in between, which sort of come out a little bit lighter gray. But you can see how that pools. You get specific stripes as opposed to the Nicobar Pigeon that you don't really get striping. You just get lots of color coming through. So these yarns on this side, which are things like Gray Peacock Pheasant, Pure Aloxia is another one that's really nice. It's just got different mottled gray, darks and lights of gray, but then it's got this nice little, he's a sort of a desert cardinal. So he's got some red in him. He's not focusing very well. He's got some red in him, but he's mostly just different grays. So the yarn, I've tried to do the same thing. So he's got different intensities of gray, and then he's got some red speckling through him. But he's not, I wouldn't say I'm a speckler like, you know, some of those really well-known like La Bien-Aimée or Lola Bean, or some people are really expert specklers, and I'm not an expert speckler. I'm more concerned with trying to use the bird as a palette for how I'm going to have the color working. So you know, if you want speckled yarn, it's probably not. I would definitely say I'm more a variegated yarn than a speckled yarn. The dark-breasted rosefinch, this pretty little pink and brown bird. So this one's got some browns, some light pinks, some darker pinks, a little bit of orange in transition. There's a sweater. I'm pretty sure my sweater is on Instagram that I made with that. Lilac breasted roller is one that gets, I have a lot of people emailing me with bird ideas, things that they think would be a good bird to dye. And I quite often have people sending me pictures of the lilac breasted roller, and I send it back and say, oh, I already do that one. So this is the bird. So he's quite pretty. He's got lots of different colors in him, and he is dyed like Nicobar Pigeon. So he's not going to stripe. He's just going to give you lots of different color. I do have a sock. There's a lilac breasted roller sock. So you can see you don't really get stripes. You just sort of get random random bits of color showing up and some spots and some blips and bloops, but in all different colors. It's got pinks and blues and high bright greens and purples all mixed in together. So you get a lot of different stuff. I do have some solids as well. I just sort of dye solids as the mood strikes. So I don't always have all the colors in stock that I have on my website, but I'm happy to dye them. And I also will dye other colors, but I try to dye ones that will go with yarns. So like I have a booby blue that would go well with great blue-footed booby if you were making a project that you needed 2 colors. I dye a black and a bunch of different grays, some different blues. This one I've got sort of a soft mint, but it's just a one of a kind that I just dyed. So I bring those to shows sometimes, but I just sort of leave them in the shop and they'll sell eventually. They sort of turn over gradually as I go. Let's see what else. I can show you my beautiful artwork. My timer just went for the yarn, so I'll get it out in a second. My beautiful artwork. So this is an artist. She lives in Ottawa now, but she's a Métis artist that's originally, I think, from the Toronto area. Her name's Christy Belcourt, and she does a lot of conservation awareness. And this one is called 4-Cedar Waxwings. My sister got it for me. It's very, very perfect for me. So there's 4-Cedar Waxwings, which is a bird I do. It's a colorway I have. And the interesting thing, if you can see, all Christy Belcourt's work has a lot of pointillism in it. It has a lot of dots of different sizes that she uses all through the paintings. And some of her paintings, like this one's spectacular, but she's got others that are just absolutely breathtaking. And she uses different size knitting needles to create all the different size dots. So I thought that was kind of full circle, that she's got the birds and she's utilizing knitting needles as she goes along. So it kind of makes it interesting. Okay, let's see. Are there any other chats? Let's see. The blue-footed one knit up, so I did show you that. The Atlantic puffin, like I said, you will be able to see if you go to my Instagram page. It'll be in the stories, but there's several samples of puffin knit up. It's quite stripy. It's red. It's bright orange, black, and white, just like the bird. So somebody said they didn't know it about Christy's work. Yeah, she's a fabulous artist. Yeah. So I don't know what else I can tell you about my yarn, other than I donate $2 a skein to Birds Canada as well for conservation. So I've always done that right from day one. So I, send them a check after every couple of months and as a donation. And that's really added up over the years. I don't know what the total is, but I did total it. I totaled it maybe a year ago, and I was over 20,000 already at that point, over the 5 years that I've been dyeing yarn. So it really does add up. I've got great customers and they buy a lot of yarn. So the birds get an awful lot of benefit from it, which is nice. All right, do you want to go over and we'll take a look at what the owls look like now, and we'll rinse them. And okay, so I'll take you back over here. Okay. So okay, so here's the great horned owl. So as I pick it up, we can see that it's pretty dark, which is what I wanted. I want it to be the darkest one of the group. And I'm going to take it and start off by and the other thing you can see is that all the dye is pretty much out. There's a little bit of color in the water, but almost all of it is absorbed into the yarn. That guy there. And can see this one is this is the middle one, the barn owl. And as I lift it up, you can see it's quite a bit different. It's quite a bit lighter. It's got lots of nice dark spots and light spots. So if we compare the two of them, if we hold them together, you can see that one is considerably darker than the other. But they have the commonalities of the two, the spots and the gold. And that water is completely clear. There's nothing left in that water at all. And then last but not least is the snowy owl. So I'll take it out. And again, it's water. I mean, it didn't have any dye to speak of in it anyways, but it's got the nice speckles. And put that in there. And then, trade secret, don't tell anybody, but all I do is I use, just gonna move these over so I can have a little bit of room. Away. Okay, so all I do now is to rinse these is I take them and I fill up my bowl with cold water and dish soap. So I just use just any kind of unscented simple dish soap. I don't use wool wash. I don't use anything fancy or expensive. And I just fill up the bowl and get it a little bit sudsy. And then I just plop the yarn in and let it sit. You can see, I just got it in here. You can just see that I just got it sitting in here. I just let it get filled up so that it's covered. And then I just let it cool. So superwash yarn is nice that I don't have to worry about it felting or anything. It just, it can go from hot right into cold. It won't hurt the yarn. Repeatedly, it's probably not good for it with its, with properties, but as long as you're just doing it occasionally. There's actually a post, I don't think I put it in my stories. Maybe I did put in my stories. There was a post the other day about a woman who had knit a pair of socks in my yarn 2 years ago and lost one sock, but she continued to wear the second sock and washed it in the washing machine and dried it at the dryer. So for 2 years, she was washing and drying it. And then she found the other sock the other day. So she had posted a picture of the two socks, and it's superwash yarn, but I mean, superwash is just a process that eliminates it wanting to felt, like it just removes the barbs. But over 2 years of washing it in the machine, it had shrunk a little bit. So there was a visible difference in size. The color had faded a little bit as well. And I think that's probably from the heat of the dryer over time. But generally, she said that the sock itself was totally wearable. There were no holes in it or anything else. It just looked, when you were comparing it to the brand new sock that had never been washed, you could see a little bit of the difference in it. That was about it. So, yeah. So yeah, all I do after that, after I've got it in the water, is I take them and put them in. I have a spin dryer that's just made especially for spinning. It's not part of a washing machine or anything, but it spins really fast. I spin it for 5 minutes. It shuts off automatically, and then I hang them up to dry behind me and let them dry naturally. And then I'll package them up and label them, and they'll be ready to go out next week. So yeah, so those were all for some orders that I had to fill. Like I said, I have a lot of sock yarn pre-dyed. So a lot of times if somebody orders a sock yarn, it'll go out that day or the next day. But if you order a worsted weight or a bulky weight or sparkle, or if you order like a sweater quantity of something, I will dye, like a sweater quantity, I'll always dye a special batch for somebody. Like I wouldn't pull, even though my lots are fairly similar, I would never mix lots for people. I would always make sure that I was doing it out of like one pan or two pans that were all dyed together. Yeah, so, you know, the longest you might wait if you place an order is maybe a week usually. And if it's going to be much longer than that, I'll send you an email and let you know that it's going to be a little bit longer because I'm out of worsted weight yarn, or I'm, you know, waiting for something to come and I can't get it dyed. But generally I can get all my orders out within a few days. So yeah. How much time do I usually spend in the dyeing room versus the shop? I'm dyeing pretty much. I'm open Tuesdays to Saturdays in my shop. I don't advertise. I barely have a sign. I have a little sign on my door, so people Google me. So I get people coming from out of town that Google yarn store. I'm the only yarn store in town, so that helps. But the store is kind of the gravy. My biggest part of my business is my online sales for sure. I'm about 5.5 years in now, and I did everything exclusively online until 2 years ago when I got the little shop. So I probably spend, percentage wise, I probably spend 75% dyeing and 25% in the shop. But I'm always here. So if somebody comes in, I'm here to wait on them. But I'm sort of open from like 10:30-ish till 4 every day. But I'm usually dyeing during that time. But dyeing is, you could see from what I did here, like it's a 5 minutes in the pan and then 20 minutes of letting it cook. And then when it's done, I can let it sit for half an hour, or an hour, or 2 hours. It doesn't have to be attended to. And then I can do something else for a little bit. So it works well. I sometimes get in a little early and I'm doing stuff and I forget to turn my sign around. So I've quite often had people knocking at the door. Are you open? It's like, oh yeah, come in. I just forgot to turn my sign on or whatever. But yeah, the store is kind of, you know, as my husband says, it just saves. It's nice because I don't have to have my yarn that I've dyed all sitting in bins in a bedroom. I can have it displayed. It's on the wall. I'm usually just picking from my stock. And then I go to yarn shows too. Like there's quite a few in Ontario over the summer. I went to Knit East last year. I went to Knit City in April. I've gone to Knit East, which was in New Brunswick. And I probably would go there again. So I literally take my racks off my wall. I've got them mounted on hooks on the wall, so I can take them right off and load them in my car. And I load all my yarn and just take my show on the road and just set up my racks again, just like I have them in my shop. And it works pretty well. So my husband and I have it down to an art. He's a big help. I'm getting, it's a little harder to do them than it was 5 years ago when I first started doing them, because it's a little more slugging. And I've got more product and that sort of thing. So it's nice that he's a little stronger than me. He can make more trips to the car. I'm usually packing and he's going back and forth to the car with the loads, which is nice. But yeah, so my shop's open when I'm here. If I'm at a show, then my shop's closed. I try pretty hard on my Google site to update my hours in advance so that if somebody is coming to town, they can Google to see when I'm open, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm not a particularly busy walk-in store, but that's okay. Like I said, I'm not, it's kind of the gravy. Like as long as I can sell enough in the store to pay the rent, it's worth me having it, because it's so wonderful to have all the space in the back where I can do all my dyeing instead of working out of my kitchen. So anyways, I think I've probably taken about the whole hour. Anybody else have any more questions or anything to say? Okay, so like I said, I've got my website is Songbird Fibres, SONGFIBRES.ca. My Instagram is the same, Songbird Fibres. and my Facebook is the same as well. So Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, although I don't know how long I'll stay on Twitter now that Elon Musk has taken back over again. But anyways, right now I'm still on Twitter. So you can follow me on those things. I really encourage people to post finished projects. It's great to see. I can't knit all the samples, so it's great to see when somebody's knit something in a yarn, and then I, definitely post it with their permission on my Instagram, in my stories, or on my page, so that other people can see samples. And if you use Love Fair, all one word, LOVEAFFAIR, all lowercase, you'll get 10% off anything in the store between now and midnight tomorrow. And yeah, and I ship anywhere, continental US, Canada. I've sent stuff to Norway and Japan and Australia. So yeah, and it's all arrived. So I think the one that took a long time, I sent something to France, and I think it was about 12 weeks. So that was during COVID, and it wasn't tracked. So I was really worried it wasn't going to show up, but it did eventually show up. So Canada Post does a pretty good job. Very interesting to see how the colors look finished. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. It was fun. This is the first time I've ever done anything of me actually dyeing something. I usually just sort of talk about my inspirations and the shop and that sort of thing. So I thought I'd switch it up and try something interesting. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. Good. I got so involved that I knit. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry that you have to think back. Oh dear. Is anybody working on the Stephen West twists and turns? No. I put some kits together. I'm a fan. I'm a fangirl. I definitely like the process. I'm totally a process knitter, so I love learning all the new things. And he's always got some interesting things that he does when he's knitting. So I've knit. I think he's done 14 mystery knit alongs, and I've probably done 7 or 8 of them. So I've done a fair few over the years, but I'm working on my twists and turns right now. So, and I usually put together 4 or 5 different kits, using a bird inspired yarn, and then using some solids to go with it. So this year, I'll just show you, I won't show you a spoiler in case people don't want to see spoilers, but I'll just show you my colors. So this is King Eider. So there you can see the King Eider colorway in the border. And then the solids I put together with it were sort of a very pale teal and a very pale salmon that also show up in the King Eider. So the Eider is the variegated. That's the bird. And then I just made a couple of samples. But I had a flamingo kit, a Nicobar pigeon kit, great blue heron kit, and a kestrel kit. So, and they sell pretty well. Like I don't know how many people do Stephen West mystery knit alongs. I think 5,000 or 6,000 people do it every year. So I have a few diehard customers that are very good to me that usually buy a kit from me. And so they have a bird inspired West knit shawl every year, which is nice. So yeah. Anyways, Eureka, is there anything else you need me to mention, or? Oh, you're muted now too. So, oh, there we go.
I don't think so. That was fabulous. I had so much fun watching you dye the yarn. I have a question though. Do you always dye several colorways at once like you did, or like you do one by one?
No, that's a good question. I usually did those 3. Because they're a fade and I'm mixing the dye that's going to go in all 3, I do usually do those in a group because it makes sense. But normally, no. Normally I have 4 induction burners, so I can do 12 skeins of yarn, 3 in each pan. And I usually do 12 of one colorway at a time. So it's much more efficient that way. So I'll do, I'll be doing cardinal. So I'll do 12 cardinal. So I just have the dye mixed for that specific bird and all ready. And yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and it's funny because you dye yarn too, right? And it's I'm sure you were probably watching going, oh, I don't do that, or oh, I do this differently or whatever. It's funny how there are probably hundreds of ways you can dye yarn. Like I don't know if there's any right way or wrong way. It's just, you know, whatever works for the dyer. So there's, you know, like I said, there's some dyers that, you know, would always do something the same way, and they might look at me doing it something different, go, oh my gosh, I would never do that. But you know, it works for me. I've been doing it for 5 years now. I have gotten better. Like I will say there's, you know, my skill has improved as I've learned. I don't mess up colorways as much anymore. I've learned to be very consistent with my dye mixing and et cetera, and I've sort of got a nice rhythm. I have a big recipe box full of all my recipes, and I try to follow it. But yeah, it's funny because like, and some, like I always use sort of immersion techniques, but there's lots of people that use steam pans. There's lots of people that have those big stands that they put their pans in, and they heat them all to like a you know, a common degree, a common temperature. And so, yeah, it's interesting. Great.
Okay. Thank you. I just stopped the recording for now. Okay. Thank you.